So a few months, maybe even a year ago now, I put out a couple videos on the A500 transmission installation in my 74 Plymouth Duster. One little video about fitting it in there and one little video about the control system that I put in there. What I've decided to do, I've learned a bit more stuff, and I've noticed that there's a lot of people with a lot of questions about this specific swap. Now, I'm not a transmission guy. I'm not going to tell you what to do to modify your transmission. I'll explain the little wee bit of stuff that I did with mine. But anyway, if you're interested in putting a factory Mopar A500 or A518 transmission in your old Mopar muscle car, stick around. Now, as far as modifications go, I'm not familiar with what all is available. I know there's lots of stuff you can do, not much different than 727 and 904. As far as modifications to the internals of the transmission, all I did with mine was basically a stock rebuild with upgraded clutches and steels. I talked to the transmission guy local to me. He's real sharp. He builds lots of transmissions for guys out at our local racetrack. And he suggested that to me. I talked to him about how I use my car, and his comment was the transmission was designed for a 4,500 pound pickup truck with whatever 180 horsepower, but my car is significantly lighter. It's got, or at least at some point will have, quite a bit more horsepower than that, but he felt with the steeper gear that I run and the lighter vehicle that the stock style rebuild with the better clutches and steels was going to be what I was going to need. So that's what I went with. It's been going on strong for probably 4 years and 10,000 kilometers, and it works just as perfectly as it did the day I put it in. So I'm pretty happy with it. One big thing, and I think it's a big deal for any automatic transmission, I put an auxiliary cooler in it. I plumbed it so that it goes to the cooler in the radiator, to the external cooler, back to the trans. Right or wrong, that's how I did it. If you are a trans guy and you know better and you think I should change it, just throw me something in the comments and tell me what I've done wrong. Now, if you're searching for one of these transmissions between, I think it was 88 and 2004 in pickups, you could get the lighter duty A500, which was based off the 904, or you could get the A518, which is the little bit heavier duty based on the 727. Now, apparently there were a few non-lockup converter versions. I've never seen one, but that don't mean much. I believe they're definitely out there. And the one that I have is a lockup converter, and I think that was probably more common, but it's not that big of a deal either way. You can get, I spoke to John Cope at Cope Racing Transmissions, and he got, is it Cope Racing? Whatever it is. Anyways, he told me that they are available. PTC is definitely an option. I know there'll be others, places that can build you whatever stall you need for your lockup Mopar converter. So that should really be no problem. Another big thing is all of them, the 500 and 518, they both use a 727 output slip yoke. So that's just one more thing to know. If you're replacing your 904 with A500 or 518, you're going to have to source yourself a 727 slip yoke. Now, you can adapt these to a big block. There's been adapters for small block transmissions to big block Mopar for years. The 500 and 518 only ever came with the small block Bellhousing bolt pattern. So I mean, it is what it is. You can get the adapters. I know they're out there. Don't know nothing about them. Never had nothing to do with one, but I know they are out there.
Oh, this is the transmission I used. It's a 1991 model A500. It's the 904 based overdrive automatic that they used in a lot of pickups.
Now, as far as bolting this thing up, flex plate's the same, torque converter's the same as the equivalent 727 or 904. Bolt patterns, obviously just small block bolt pattern on the bell housing. And as far as that part goes, there's absolutely no difference whatsoever. Oh, and the shifter is exactly the same, connects exactly the same as the car does. The only difference is if you're hooking it up to your factory console shift, you'll have to do something just to support the bottom of that vertical shift rod on your console shift linkage.
Now, this first image is the tunnel the way it looks when it's unaltered. And then we have some pictures of my tunnel as it's been modified. Now, when I bought the car, this was already done, so I can't take credit for this, but a real nice job was done of this. You can see the initial cuts that I made on the support bracket for the transmission, and also how nicely the transmission fits up inside there. Now, the transmission does go a little bit higher than it shows in this photo, but it actually doesn't go that much higher. It fits in there real nice with quite a bit of room to spare. This is how I ended up designing the cross member that I made. I built it from scratch, but to start off with, I cut up the factory cross member, as you can see, and I just bolted the two outer pieces up in place, set the centerpiece where I needed, and welded some chunks of steel just to locate everything where it needed to be. It turned out really well. It just, I mean, obviously the way it's done, there's no way that this would be nearly strong enough to do the job. What it did do, though, is it let me know exactly what needed to be where and how I could design the final product. So starting with some steel that I had around, and nothing fancy for tools, but I just started cutting and fitting and figuring out what I needed. I think you may be able to notice that my first shape that I cut here is far deeper than it ended up being if you see the images of the final product in the next couple pictures. Now this is the transmission mount that I used. It's a pretty common garden variety transmission mount used in a million different applications, probably mostly Chevy applications, but it worked really good. All I had to do is slot the holes in the metal portion of it so that it would bolt up to my A500 transmission in the factory location. And here's the transmission mount bolted up to the transmission, and I'm just piecing together and figuring out what exactly I need to make to get this as high and tight and as nice as it can go. Obviously, a guy needs to make room for exhaust, and you don't want anything hanging any lower than it needs to be. So this is how I did it. I just kept piecing it together till it ended up being the way I wanted it. So this is how my cross member ended up looking. It worked out really well. It's nice and high and tight. If you notice, my mounting slots are slotted side to side. Now, the reason I did that is because I had a little trouble when I first put it together with angularity of the transmission, and it ended up, it wasn't up and down angularity that I had a problem with, but side to side. So that's what I ended up doing, is I just slotted that sideways so that I could get my tail shaft dead center with the rear differential yoke, and it actually all turned out really well. Here it is installed. I didn't have to really do anything to my exhaust to keep it working. I did put just a tiny little wee dimple in it, but you know what? If I'd have been thinking about exhaust routing more when I was building the bracket, it wouldn't have been a problem. I wouldn't have had to do the little tiny dent that I did. Overall, it looks really good, and it sits higher than the deep pan in the transmission, so it's certainly not the lowest hanging item on the car. Obviously, with these cheap headers, that's going to be my exhaust. That's the low hanger anyway. But I'm really happy with the way it turned out. So the last thing, once you've got that thing all hooked up and installed, you have to remember you do have to shorten your drive shaft. I don't remember exactly how much I had to shorten it, but you're best off just to do a measurement once you got everything together and either shorten your existing drive shaft or order a new one at the specs that you need. But that part's easy. Usually most fellas let somebody else build the drive shaft, so I'll let you figure that one out on your own. So on the passenger side of these transmissions, there is something called a governor test port. Now, what it is it's just exactly that. I guess it's for testing your governor if you're having tranny trouble. But anyway, it provides about 1 psi of tranny fluid pressure for every mile per hour that you're going. So using pressure switches hooked to that is a pretty sweet way to automatically turn on your overdrive and lockup. Now you can do it just with switches. You flip one switch, the overdrive goes on, flip the other switch, the lockup goes on, and that would be fine. But I wanted to try and make it a little more automated, and I was pretty happy with the way it turned out. Now here are my pressure switches. These are adjustable Honeywell pressure switches. I'll put the parts information for all this stuff in the description of this video, just in case anybody's interested. Anyway, they go over to here and they fire these 2 relays, and the 2 relays are what controls the overdrive and the lockup. Now this is just a quick schematic diagram of how I wired up my control system. There's an on-off switch that controls everything. One thing I didn't mark out in this control diagram is the on-off switch wire is a fused wire. There it goes to a vacuum switch, which operates as my kick down for the overdrive and lockup. When the vacuum drops, it opens the circuit and de-energizes coil R1 and R2. So there you go. If you've got appropriate vacuum, pressure switch 1 closes at approximately 40 psi or 40 miles an hour, and PS2 closes at approximately 45 psi or 45 miles an hour. What that results in is when PS1 closes, R1 energizes and turns on my lockup, my overdrive, pardon me. At 45 mile an hour, R2 energizes and the R2 contacts close and put on my lockup. That's as simple as it gets. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody else. I have an electrical background, and schematic type things is what makes sense to me, so that's what I'm going to share with you. Now, one thing I want to talk about briefly is my vacuum switch. Now, if you remember, the vacuum switch just acts as a kick down for the overdrive and lockup. When the vacuum drops, higher load on the engine, it de-energizes the relays, shuts off the overdrive and lockup, shifts you back down at the 3rd gear. You buzz on down the road with a little more gearing to help you out. Now, as soon as the load is removed, you're back up to cruise. Vacuum comes back on, switches back your overdrive and lockup as long as you're still going the speed that allows overdrive and lockup to hook up. Only problem is now and again when you're just slowly accelerating away, like going out of an off-ramp onto the freeway or blah, blah, blah. Sometimes in just the right conditions, you can get a bit of a, I don't know what you call it, an oscillation or hunting between overdrive on, overdrive off, overdrive on, overdrive off. You're just kind of on the verge of when that vacuum switch wants to pick up or drop out. So there's a couple ways that I can possibly sort this out. One is I'd like to actually source some kind of a vacuum switch that maybe has a bit of a deadband. Maybe it'll close at 7 inches of vacuum, but only open when it gets to 4 or whatever,
just something to avoid that hunting or oscillation. Another thing I've thought about is, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but I might be able to wire in some kind of a relay so that it kicks on when the vacuum is made, but the vacuum has to be gone for X amount of time before it'll actually knock those relays out. There'll be something, I'll be able to work around it, but to be honest with you, I've kind of just learned to drive around it, and I just make sure that if I do feel it starting to do that, or I do have a vacuum gauge in my car, if I'm at a vacuum level that I know it's going to happen, I just put my foot in it a little bit more, take my foot out of it a little bit more. It's really not that big of a deal, but I don't know, the anal retentive part of my personality just makes me always think about better ways to do it. With those solenoids, where you mount them, if you can keep them away from sources of heat, that's kind of important. When I drive the car for extended period of time, when it's real hot out and underhood temperatures get quite high, the pressure switches have failed, and I believe like once they cool down, they work properly again. So I believe everything just gets hot and expands and just does not allow it to does not allow the vacuum to overtake and close the switch, because that's what happens. Doesn't matter how fast you go, you're never going to close that switch, and the overdrive's just never going to engage. So do what you can to keep those pressure switches cool. I do still think I'm going to probably relocate mine. They're currently under the hood, but I'm going to see what it's going to be like to mount them right down by the transmission, right near that governor test port. As far as the wiring down to the transmission goes, from your relays, there's just 3 wires that got to go down to a plug-in at the basically driver's side rear, kind of above the transmission pan, where you'll be able to easily see where it is. It's just directly behind the shifter stick and all that kind of business. It'll be super easy to see where that 3-prong plug is. Big thing when you're looking for a transmission, make sure the transmission only has the 3 prongs there, because there's got more than 3 prongs. You're looking at the RE transmission, and there's just a little more issues with controlling that one. Now there is a company called PATC, Performance Automatic Transmission Center, or something like that. If you Google PATC, it'll come up. Anyway, they have a kit with a couple pressure switches and a couple relays, and they give you a good diagram, wiring diagram, blah blah blah. I don't know if I really saved any money over just buying their kit and having it a lot more straightforward. So unless you got some kind of connections and you can get super cheap crap, just going to PATC, buying their kits. I've read good things, heard good things about the quality of the parts included, and if I had to do over again, or if I do ever do it over again, probably that's the way I'm going to go for the parts to my control system. Now, something I've learned since I've been kind of more interested in this stuff and looking around at it, if you can only find the RE transmission, which, to be honest with you, around my area, it's not super easy to find the RH transmissions. I was pretty fortunate when I found the one that I used, and I got a real good deal on it. Had to be rebuilt, but whatever. I would have probably rebuilt it just for peace of mind anyway. So say all you can get is the RE transmission. You can get a manual valve body that you just shift the automatic transmission manually. There's no automatic shifting function in it, but you shift the automatic transmission manually, and you still retain the overdrive, which is electronically controlled, just like we've talked about before. I don't know if anybody else is doing this, but I do know, again, that Cope Racing Transmissions is a place that can provide that manual valve body for the RE transmissions. Apparently, it's pretty bulletproof. It's a great way to go, especially if you've got more of a like a race car that you just like to drive to the track sort of thing. Or I honestly think it would be a really sweet option, especially because I mean I think they made a whole hell of a lot more of the RE transmissions than the RHs. And you know what? I've never lived with one, but I honestly don't think a manual valve body transmission would be a bad thing to cruise around and have fun with in a car. So that's it. Now you know everything I know about the subject. Hope some of that might help somebody at some point. There's a little more information there than there was in the prior videos, and I condensed the two videos into one. So thanks for watching. If you got something out of it, I do my best to share as much as I can now and then with if I think it's going to be something that helps everybody. So maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Give me a comment if you can think of anything you might think I done wrong or I should do differently or whatever. Thanks for watching.